The situation in the eastern part of Democratic Republic of Congo is escalating so fast and has attracted different commentaries from people around the region and on the globe generally. And we breathe a sigh of relief at the possibility of EAC and SADC meeting soon. Although the critical question that we seek to answer tonight is, can the two blocs find a lasting solution to this conflict that has been raging for decades? Good evening and a warm welcome to a special program on the Eastern DRC conflict. My name is Jackie Lumbasi, and with me on the program tonight, I have a wonderful lineup of guests that will help us better understand the situation that is on the ground in Eastern DRC. Starting off with my extreme left, Dr. Frederick Goloba Mutebi, who's a political researcher and analyst. And in the middle, we've got James Munyaneza, who's a veteran journalist that's seated just right next to Dr. Mutebi. Good to see you, James. We also have Jean-Baptiste Gassominari, who's an expert in regional security. It is a pleasure to have Frederick with us, James, and Jean-Baptiste. Gentlemen, thank you for honoring our invitation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and you're most welcome wherever you're watching us from. Thank you for sparing time. A lot has been said regarding the issue in the Eastern DRC, and just before we kickstart the conversation here in the studio, let us go back to a news report that we saw on RTV a few days ago. We had a crew that visited the South African military base in Mwambiro, which is located near a former Congolese army training facility. Let's have a look at that report that was filed by Serge Nore.
In Mwambiro, about 25 kilometers from the town of Goma, there is a major military base housing South African troops who are part of the Southern African Development Community mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or SAMI DRC. The troops were deployed to support the government of President Felix Antoine Tshisekedi in his fight against the M23 rebel group. When M23 advanced from Masisi to Ngugu, passing through Sake toward Goma, the South African forces joined the Congolese army, or FARDC, and the FDLR terrorist group in fighting against the rebels, who are Congolese nationals advocating for their rights. According to reports from sources present during the clashes, after facing intense fire and suffering heavy casualties, the South African forces surrendered. The South African military base in Mwambiro is located near a former Congolese army training facility. Currently, M23 controls the base after decisively defeating the coalition of Congolese forces, the FDLR, SADC troops and mercenaries. Burnt-out tanks and remnants of destroyed vehicles, some with human remains still inside, litter the area. Since then, South African troops have been in a difficult position. At midday on Thursday, M23 military leaders decided to visit the South African commanders at the Mwambiro base. Upon arrival, they called on the base guards to summon their senior officers for discussions. It took about 5 minutes before the South African commanders emerged. Initially fearful, their apprehension lessened as the conversation progressed, even leading to moments of laughter. At one point, they even exchanged war updates and phone numbers. One M23 commander revealed that his family is living in a refugee camp in a neighboring country, and stated that even if he were to die in battle, he would do so fighting against long-standing injustices. He asked the South African soldiers why they were supporting President Tshisekedi against Congolese citizens and why they were fighting alongside the genocidal FDLR militia. The South African officers responded that such decisions were beyond their control and likely driven by political interests. After exchanging phone numbers, an M23 soldier jokingly said, and I quote, "I hope we'll meet again in Bukavu," end of quote. In response, a South African soldier admitted that he had no desire to fight anymore and just wanted to return home. The South African troops were curious about the M23 fighters. The South African commanders presented three main requests to M23. The first being permission to use Goma's airport to repatriate the bodies of their fallen soldiers. The second, authorization to access previous battle zones to recover the remains of their comrades. And the third, the ability to collect food and supplies stored in Goma, and if necessary, use armored vehicles for transportation to prevent looting. After listening to their requests, the M23 officers told them to put them in writing so that they could be forwarded to their leadership. They assured them of their willingness to assist. After the meeting at Mubambiro, M23 commanders also met with South African officers stationed near Goma's international airport. Their conversation was friendly, with occasional laughter. However, one insider revealed to us that South African troops had directly supported the Congolese army and FDLR during the battle at Goma's airport, where they also fired artillery into Rwanda. Overall, South Africa has military companies deployed in Goma, totaling around 750 soldiers, the equivalent of 1 battalion. 5 companies are stationed at Mubambiro, while 2 others are near Goma's airport. So far, South Africa has officially acknowledged the deaths of 13 of its soldiers in the fighting leading up to M23's capture of Goma. However, our investigations suggest that the actual number could be around 50. The fact that South African officers requested permission to retrieve additional remains from battle zones indicates that the real death toll may be higher than officially reported.
And that's a report by RTV's Serge Nore, who was in Goma. James, I'm going to start with you. When that clip went on air, it was met by mixed reactions. There are those that felt like it fell short. They wanted, instead of quotes, can you show us the people that you interviewed? I would love to hear your thoughts on the general coverage in the media of the conflict in Eastern DRC.
Thank you, Jackie. I think from my perspective, there's been a lot of, I would say, untruth. There's a lot of misrepresentation of both what is happening, taking place on the ground. From this report by Serge Nore, the report by RBA, you can see that obviously there's a situation. South African troops were on the battlefield. Yeah. We are fighting alongside the coalition, the rest of the coalition forces, and this is DR Congo, FARDC, FDLR. Sometimes people forget that this is a genocidal militia, blacklisted, of course, sanctioned by UN and by US as a terrorist organization. These are genocide force that killed people in Rwanda in the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. So that's a very critical element that people tend to brush over and dismiss, or they don't want to pay attention to it because it has lots of implications. What does it mean when South African troops are fighting alongside a genocidal force, a force that killed or that is linked to the genocide that happened here in Rwanda at the time South Africa was celebrating the end of the apartheid regime? This is 30 years ago. And we have to remember, in this case, South Africa has been following closely this story of Congo. They first deployed under MONUSCO in the late 1990s. Around 2013, South Africa again deploys as part of, under the Force Brigade Intervention Force that had an offensive mandate. You know, MONUSCO were peacekeepers, they are generally peacekeepers, but they had to bring in that offensive kind of force. South Africa contributed. And that's a force that eventually drove M23 from Goma 2013. And then, recently, they deploy again, for the third time, a force under the SADC framework. But this was very clear, to fight alongside the Congo troops and the coalition forces, against the M23. And this you can see from the testimonies that are coming from the ground. But when you look at how, for instance, sections of the South African media are covering this, and how what politicians in South Africa, including their president, unfortunately, these very basic facts are being distorted, where the president said this was a peacekeeping force, which is not true. This was a combat offensive force at the battlefield, fighting alongside a genocidal force that is known to be hostile to a neighboring country, troops amassed next to the border with Rwanda. So when you look at generally the coverage from the South African media, you see clear bias. Initially, you feel like, okay, to an extent you think that maybe people do not understand this, but then South Africa has closely been following. The question is, and there have been people asking, what is driving South African agenda? And if you look at what the spokesperson of the government of Rwanda just responded to President Ramaphosa, his post on X a few moments ago, because Ramaphosa was repeating the same narrative that this was a peacekeeping force that was taken or that was attacked, which is not true. And this is what the government of Rwanda has been trying to put across. Coverage-wise, you could look at it and say, okay, South African media, I think somebody is pocketing quite a good number of them, trying to put out this narrative that M23, and now lately they have said Rwanda actually.
They're not even saying Rwanda backed M23.
They actually said Rwanda, then say supporting this M23. You saw the provocation of referring to the RDF, Rwanda Defense Force, as a militia as well.
Yeah.
And you look at how basically this narrative is being put together, pushed. You're like, okay, something is being hidden. People are hiding something. Of course, from the Rwandan side, I believe we could do better, but we have at least managed to get some insights from what is going on the other side. From the South African contingent,
we've tried our best.
We don't want to be part of this. We want to go back home. Is it going to happen? That remains to be seen.
Good. Fred, you have, that's Dr. Goloba, you've covered, spoken, written about the Eastern DRC for years. What would you say, and looking at the recent events and South Africa's reaction, do you feel like South Africa understands the implications of a national army fighting alongside a genocidal force?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jackie. I wouldn't say that I have covered the Congo. I've been observing it. And as you said, I have written quite a bit about it. I have been involved in all kinds of discussions with various people who are interested in this issue. And I would like to echo what James said, although he said it only about the South African media, but media generally, media across the world misrepresent what is happening in Congo. They misreport it. I think for some, it's just willful misreporting because they want to portray certain image of certain actors in the theater. Others, I would presume that it's probably just lack of, or maybe one could call it laziness, lack of self-application to try and understand exactly what's going on. And that even applies to regional media. Media in the surrounding countries. You read reports on the Congo or the crisis in the Congo, and they're all focusing again on M23 and who is supporting M23. The question of what M23 represents or what lies at the root of the M23 crisis doesn't seem to interest many people. So if we have this kind of situation in the neighborhood, in countries that are neighboring the DRC and Rwanda, imagine South Africa. And if I may go back a little bit, when the Kenyans were going to deploy in Eastern DRC, you may recall that people were being very jingoistic, and they were talking about how the Kenyan army was going to crush M23. And that again showed just how little people knew what was afoot in the DRC. And it took after the deployment of the Kenyan force for President Ruto to be briefed and for him to understand what was really going on, that the narrative again then suddenly changed from a belligerent one towards one that says, well, we need to sort this out politically. So the influence of international media, and we all consume a lot of it, and unfortunately some of our regional and local media also depend on news agencies best in the Western world. So what they report is what we consume. What they produce is what our own media are producing. So eventually you end up with a situation where only probably people in Rwanda and others who are not Rwandans who have worked very hard to try and understand what's going on actually understand what the issue is. So when you hear people saying, let's go to the root of the crisis, what is the root cause of this crisis, and people not paying attention, it's because they have been seduced by this idea that somehow M23 is a violent militia that is going around raping and murdering people, and it's supported by Rwanda, whose interest is merely in Congo's resources.
Minerals.
The whole story then becomes completely distorted. And personally, I don't blame the South Africans. Their belligerence is based, I think, on two factors. One is, it seems, the economic interests that South Africa, or some personalities in South Africa have in the DRC, but also on the lies and distortions that have been told about this crisis for a long time.
Jean-Baptiste, as a security expert, what's your observation?
I think maybe to start from where he ends, I may not share his views about the two reasons that South Africans are distorting the truth. Firstly, they cannot claim that they do not understand what is going on in the eastern part of DRC, simply because they have been deployed there since 1999. So they are among the people that are well informed if they wanted to be informed about what is going on. Going back to 2013, when the United Nations Security Council adopted a resolution, if my memory serves me well, I think it was resolution 2098, when they created what they called Force Intervention Brigade within MONUSCO. South Africa was the biggest contributor in that force.
That's one James made reference to. Eh?
Exactly. And among the responsibilities they were given, it was to fight what they called negative forces at that time, which included M23 and FDLR. The force did what it was told to do. After defeating M23, after M23 fled to Uganda, they were supposed now to flush out FDLR, which they never did. And the resolution is still there. And there is no other resolution that was voted within United Nations Security Council to say that you should stop implementing this resolution. So South Africa today cannot claim that they are not fighting alongside a genocidal militia, because they know very well that that militia is there, and they had been mandated since 2013 to fight that militia. So when it comes to personal interest from maybe some government officials, that one is obvious. But saying that maybe they are being misled because of lies that are being told or misrepresentation in the media, I think I have a reserve towards that. South Africa is among the countries that are well informed about what is going on in the Eastern DRC. And what is troubling exactly, as they rightly mentioned, is everyone seems to be carried away by that M23 advancing and purportedly supported by Rwanda or any other person. But why they are fighting is just overlooked. And any observer who is neutral, what you would like to know first is, why is this organization in existence? Why are they fighting? Because fighting is just not an activity of leisure that one can engage into when he wants or when he does not want. So it entails sacrifice of human beings, of human lives. So but no one bothers to know why these people are fighting. Because in 2013, when they decided that they are going to fight them, after defeating them, there were meetings that were organized in Nairobi. There was even a communique that was signed at that time. If they wanted to solve the root causes, they should have, or they would have now taken that advantage that M23 was not on the ground, now saying that now that we have a relative peace and calmness, let's look now into the grievances of these people and try to solve them so that we solve this problem once and for all. But what they did after they fled, they just forgotten that there was an issue or grievances that the people brought forward and even take up arms to fight for it. So, because this is a conflict that has been going on since the existence of DRC. Actually, the root causes of this crisis in the Eastern DRC, they back from partition of Africa in 1884, 1880s. When a big chunk of land that belonged to Rwanda at that time, with the population that was a Rwandan population, with Rwandan culture and language, was given to DRC of that time. So after independence, new authorities in DRC were proud and happy to have a big land that they inherited from partition of Africa, but they never considered the people living on that land.
The landowners.
Yes. So they are interested in the land, but not on the land owners. So this is basically the issue surrounding all these crises that are going on in the Eastern DRC. Before 1994, it was a crisis that was contained, if I may repeat the words of President Mobutu, because at that time there were no clashes, but the issue was seen everywhere because the Kinyarwanda speaking populations were discriminated in all areas of the life of the country. But after 1994, after the genocide perpetrated against the Tutsi in Rwanda, and after the fleeing of the former government forces and Interahamwe militia, this genocide ideology was exported to that area. And the area was actually fertile for this ideology because the majority of the people living in North Kivu are Kinyarwanda speaking and mostly from the Hutu ethnic group. So they made a coalition. They said that they were the same people, having portraying that they were having the same threats, and that their enemy, their common enemy, was a Tutsi. So they made a coalition and did everything they could to drive Tutsis away from their land. This is when all the refugee camps you see around in Rwanda, Uganda, some in Kenya, and to a lesser extent in Tanzania originate from. So all the Tutsis that were living in eastern part of DRC, in North Kivu, especially in the territories of Nyiragongo, Ruchuru, Masisi, and the town of Goma, those who were not killed were actually forced into exile. And from then, they are living in refugee camps. Today, the fighters of M23 are the sons and daughters of those people. And the world seem not to see the real problem. Why are these people fighting? Because they have been in refugee camp for more than 2 decades. They are claiming to have the right to go back to their countries and have the rights as other citizens.
I would love to bring in Dr. Goloba. Dr. Goloba, Jean-Baptiste says the world has refused to see this. Do you think that the world is adamant deliberately? It's clear for everyone to see, but they've just chosen not to see it, or as you said earlier, distort it for their own good?
I'm afraid I don't believe that it's clear for everyone to see. I think we ignore the power of media and how media shapes attitudes and how media influences the way people think about things. Now, we who live here in Rwanda, people who live in Eastern DRC and others around us may have an idea about FDLR and what it represents. But don't forget that there are questions always being raised about how big or how much of a threat FDLR is. So the minimization of the threat that FDLR poses by claiming that, look, maybe there are just 1,000 or 2,000 of them, what kind of threat are they? This is an excuse that Rwanda uses to go and steal minerals from Congo. M23 is a proxy of Rwanda. These things matter. They have an impact. Now, to say that, you know, the South Africans know, yes, they do. But again, the question of how much of a threat is FDLR. Now, this question is asked by a lot of people, some of them quite seriously, because they want to understand. Now, there is this idea that somehow, because they are few, and they can't invade Rwanda and seize territory and hold on to it, therefore they are not a threat. But the thing that people disregard is that there is a very important sense in which FDLR is a threat to Rwanda, in that the hub of Rwanda's tourism industry is along the areas next to which FDLR is. Now, FDLR doesn't have to take territory and seize territory and occupy it to destabilize Rwanda. They just need to make a few incursions into Rwanda, burn villages, kill a few people, and then what will happen next? Travel advisories are going to be issued. The tourism industry of this country is going to collapse. The confidence of Rwandans in that region, in the government's ability to guarantee their security, is going to collapse. So that's the sense in which FDLR poses an immediate threat to Rwanda. Very few people understand that, even those who live here, including Western diplomats who are here, because they keep asking this question. And the fact that the media, and I follow media all the time, you listen to any international radio, whether it's BBC Radio, France International, VOA, they are always talking about Rwanda-backed M23, no mention of FDLR, no mention of what the issue is, just Rwanda-backed M23. Now go to Uganda, go to Kenya, you'll find people who are actually well exposed, well educated, who keep parroting this idea that somehow the problem in Congo is Rwanda's designs to rob Congo's wealth and using M23 as a proxy. Now, if I take you back slightly to something that was said and repeated so many times in the beginning of this particular crisis, so-called experts, Great Lakes experts, presented the outbreak of this war as being due to the rivalry between Rwanda and Uganda. And they presented the current crisis as having been triggered by Rwanda because Uganda was building roads in the DRC and Rwanda wanted to prevent Uganda from building roads in the DRC. Now, what they disregarded is that this particular group that started this war had been in Uganda. And therefore, they came from Uganda to attack Congo. They first captured Bunagana. Therefore, the whole idea that somehow they had been triggered by Rwanda in order to sabotage Uganda just didn't make sense. But this was said, repeated, recycled, and for several months, people were parroting this idea until President Museveni came out and said, you know what, these guys actually came from Uganda. I let them go because what they had been promised didn't materialize and they were bored and so they left. But just imagine how much that became part of the main narrative. Rwanda triggered M23 because of their rivalry with Uganda. Rwanda wanted to sabotage Uganda, and everyone was repeating it. Yeah. So let's not underestimate the impact of repeated lies or repeated distortions via media.
A section of people will believe them.
Yeah.
Yeah. James, you want to say something?
Yeah, I want also to add something. You know, some of the media have been framing, or the parties to this conflict have been framing this as a struggle against the influence of the West, Western countries that are using Rwanda as a proxy.
Because Rwanda is the darling of the West?
There is that aspect, but the world, you know, the big powers want to steal Congo's minerals, so they're using Rwanda. All this kind of stuff. But the evidence suggests otherwise. If you look at what actually has been ongoing, let's say in the area of Goma alone, where you had, by the way, more than 50,000 troops from all these different countries, and the militias, different militias, the Wazalendos, Congo troops and all, with heavy weaponry, artillery in Goma and the outskirts of Goma. And then you have the mercenaries, who are not African. These are European.
They're European.
Mercenaries. They passed here the other day, some of them.
More than 200.
Almost in total, almost 2,000. They say, the estimates say 1,700 in total. And is all from European countries, and maybe other countries as well, not in Africa. So these are guys. So basically you have Congolese government that is hiring, among others, Western mercenaries to come and help Congo kill its own people. Right?
Yeah.
And then who is here aligning with Western elements, if you like? It cannot be the M23 who are fighting for survival. It cannot be Rwanda that has a right, I believe, to sympathize with the M23 cause, with the suffering of Kinyarwanda-speaking communities in Eastern Congo. Rwanda has a responsibility, just like any country has a responsibility, to protect civilians anywhere in the world, innocent civilians, from massacres, from being persecuted and targeted by anybody, whether it is their government or any other actor. Yeah, so that has been, I think, one of the things that have been pushed out there, which is a flawed narrative. The other aspect has been the issue of saying, look, M23 attacked in violation of a ceasefire. But which ceasefire? Because these guys were kicked out of the inter-Congolese talks in Nairobi. The Nairobi process, initially, the whole idea actually was you need to have inclusive dialogue, including the key, one of the key, if not the main group, which is M23. But the Congolese government said, no, we can't talk to them. These ones out, we'll talk to others. We'll talk to our friends. We'll talk to our allies. It didn't make sense. So what kind of ceasefire actually are they even talking about? I know they refer to the Rwanda process, which has collapsed as of now, unless then new efforts can be taken and it is revived. Otherwise, how could you then choose and say, oh, these guys have been gaining ground and making offensives in violation of a ceasefire that they will never, of a process they never part of. Finally, Jackie, I wanted to also add the issue of interests that go beyond just what we are seeing. You know, the MONUSCO force, the largest UN peacekeeping force ever. I don't know whether it's really peacekeeping per se, but the largest UN operation anywhere, 20,000 plus.
Based in the DRC.
Based in the DRC as well. Who actually have had a very negative role instead. We have seen stories previously how they even actually, UN forces themselves, MONUSCO elements in MONUSCO they traded weapons for gold with FDLR. You know, and we saw mercenaries the other day going back, proudly, freely, casually putting on caps and with MONUSCO logos, of course, T-shirts with the FALDC Special Force. So clearly you could see that maybe there was a much bigger agenda. Finally, do not forget what the government of Rwanda actually talked about yesterday. They haven't revealed so much, but they said from even the documentary evidence that was found in Goma, that there was a clear plan to extend this war into Rwanda, finish off M23, then continue to Kigali. Of course, the president of Congo has repeatedly talked of regime change in Rwanda, so those intentions, yeah. So I think there are so many interests that people need to look at and go deeper.
Yeah. Baptiste, what did you read into the presence of mercenaries, you know?
Well, what I read from the presence of mercenaries, firstly is the wish of Tshisekedi to win the war.
And he would do anything.
Anything.
To win.
So he invited the government of Burundi to come and support. You remember he kicked out the East African Community Force, which had come to help and foster an environment where there will be a dialogue between warring parties so that an agreement could be found. Then, after kicking out this force, he invited SADC because SADC wanted to come and fight. So because neither SADC, nor Burundi, nor FRDC and FDLR were efficient enough in the eyes of Tshisekedi, so he also went and hired mercenaries to come and assist in that regard.
And so when you bring in mercenaries to finish your people, really, as a
leader,
but what are you trying
actually,
to communicate?
what I just wanted to mention is if you have been following the international media, we all saw these mercenaries when they were being repatriated to their country. But no single television, no online media broadcasted those images which were available. But
some of them did, but they called them instructors, military instructors.
Well, but
give them a different name.
Were they military instructors? They were mercenaries fighting alongside with FRDC. They were the ones operating the drones and the heavy artillery for FRDC. And they themselves acknowledge that. So whoever calls them instructor or anything, it's a way of distorting the truth, which actually brings about the misinformation and the misrepresentation that we were talking about.
And also for our viewers, just so they know that use of mercenaries actually is illegal. It goes against the African Convention, the UN Convention against the use of mercenaries.
It is illegal.
It is illegal.
You know, I kept seeing a lot of people sharing some clauses that sort of made it legal.
Yeah.
And now you're saying it's illegal.
Yeah. The AU Convention 77, the UN Convention, I think, of 89 or 88. Yeah, it is illegal. Yeah.
Yes.
So did Rwanda do the right thing to allow them to go, or should they have been kept here and tried?
I think, if I remember, there was a comment from one official who said, we hope their countries will hold them to account.
Okay.
Yeah, but of course, the biggest player here is the party that hired them to come and kill the Congolese citizens.
I would love us to have a look at SADC and the EAC. Now we're saying we've heard that they will have a meeting. Do we have a date yet?
Yes, on Saturday.
On Saturday, all right. So before I get comments from our guests on the upcoming summit, I would love us to have a look at what the president said a few days ago. President Paul Kagame talking about the Uhuru process and the Rwanda process and touching on the participation of South Africa. Let's have a look at that.
President, I asked last time in our meeting, the last summit, where is East African community, or does it exist? And exist for what? By the way, even now the person or the country we are talking about is not represented as we are discussing. And it is supposed to be, the country is supposed to be part of East Africa, but nowhere to be represented. So I'm not sure what bearing what we are discussing has on what happens in the process of finding a solution in this country. I'll move on. The conflict that was created from the time we had the East African community get involved in trying to help in Congo. And later on, when the East African force was trying its best and we are seeing progress, Tshisekedi decided they are not doing what he wanted and went to SADC. SADC agreed they would come and do what he wanted and sent everybody packing. And that we complied and kept quiet. What really did we expect to come out of this? Now, worse still, I think even in East Africa itself, ourselves, maybe we have different understanding of what the problem is, and we have never come together to agree or even disagree and find a way to come together finally to do what we ought to do to deal with this problem. Or we simply decided, each country, to move on its own with a different agenda arising out of involvement or whatever in Congo, and that was enough. If your interests were catered for by Tshisekedi, that was fine, even if the others' interests or concerns were not taken care of. You can imagine, therefore, what chaos comes out of that kind of situation. We are, on one hand, assuming or pretending we are coming together over an issue and trying to find a solution, while at the same time, each country is pulling in its own direction, different from the others. This is the fact of the matter. Now, but even if we were doing everything right, all of us, nothing is going to come out of it until those mainly concerned are also part of it and participating and contributing to the success of the process through which they are getting the support. But if the parties decide or accept to be manipulated, because, and by the way, that's exactly what happened, and I think in Congo, there are experts for doing that. They would go to one party and promise them something, and then they would decide to keep quiet about what is obviously going to result into problems like we are seeing now. Or, like he did, he didn't want East African community because they were not doing things the way he wanted, even if it was not right. He got rid of them and he decided to bring in SADC. SADC was, without any question, coming to assist Tshisekedi to fight alongside FDLR, these murderers of our people here in this country.
President Paul Kagame was addressing his fellow EAC leaders during a virtual meeting that was called by the current chairman, William Ruto, president of Kenya. And since then, we had a tweet by President of South Africa. We had a response from President Kagame, who was not happy at all by that tweet. And we also had a meeting last Friday of SADC leaders. And in this meeting, they condemned the attack on Sami DRC. They expressed concern that the recent attacks continue to worsen the security and humanitarian situation in the DRC. The East African leaders seem to all want to have that joint summit. President Museveni said it, Ruto said it. We had President Kagame asking for that meeting. Goloba, do you see these two blocs coming together and finding a solution to this conflict? Or will it continue being talk? Let me start with you.
Do you want to make reference to, before we proceed, maybe to the latest from M23?
Okay.
The statement they just released announcing a ceasefire.
Oh,
yeah.
Can you read that for us?
Tomorrow.
Yeah, the Alliance Fleuve Congo AFC, M23, hereby informs the public that in response to the humanitarian crisis caused by the Kinshasa regime, it declares a ceasefire starting February 4th, 2025, for humanitarian reasons. That's number one. Number two, we condemn the FARDC's continued use of military aircraft at Kavumu Airport, where they load bombs that kill our compatriots in liberated areas. Number three, it must be made clear that we have no intention of capturing Bukavu or other areas. However, we reiterate our commitment to protecting and defending the civilian population and our positions. Number four and last, we urge Sami DRC to withdraw its forces from DRC, as we have repeatedly stated that their mission is no longer justified. Signed by Lawrence Kanyuka, Communication Focal Point.
Thanks for that, James, because I was going to ask, so are they marching to Bukavu? Because during the day, we saw videos of allegedly them moving to Bukavu, and there were also talks of them going to Kinshasa. So that's an interesting development. Thank you so much for that. Goloba, back to you.
Yeah, I mean, the question of whether these two sides can find a lasting solution. I think we shouldn't disregard the fact that when we talk of SADC deploying troops in the DRC, we are not talking of the entire SADC. There are no Mozambican troops in the DRC. There are no Zimbabwean troops in the DRC. There are no troops from Namibia or Botswana. This so-called deployment by SADC was led by South Africa. And I think that the Malawians and the Tanzanians responded in very symbolic fashion, and we haven't heard of them being belligerently involved in the DRC. So it's really South Africa. And I think that South Africa has to be made to understand that its role in the DRC is counterproductive. And personally, I hope that if South Africa continues to want to engage militarily in the DRC, that East African countries can do something about it. Because if they left it to M23, and allegedly, I mean, Rwanda, which has security concerns in the DRC, South Africa is not going to be put in its place, because South Africa has this attitude of, I think, feeling like they're some kind of big brother to everybody, and so they can get away with whatever they want to do. I think that the East African community would probably try to convince SADC that there is a problem here that needs to be dealt with politically. But I worry that South Africa and the way they like sounding drums are going to want to continue to throw their weight around. And I hope that the East African community will not stand for this. Because if we can't solve this crisis this time round, when are we going to solve it? 10 years from now? 12 years ago, we were exactly where we are now.
Yeah.
They brought in the Force Intervention Brigade. I mean, those of us who observe these things, many of us thought that was the wrong thing to do. It wasn't going to be a solution to anything. The international community, so-called, inflicted damage on Rwanda's economy by suspending aid and cutting aid. And again, that wasn't a solution. So are we going to have a solution this time? But before I finish, I need to add something that I've been feeling quite strongly. I think that Western powers are a confusing agent when it comes to efforts to try and resolve the crisis in the DRC. They know what the problem is. They are guided by their own interests in the DRC, and they are very happy to distort what is going on there. They have been totally unwilling to allow regional powers or the regions, SADC and the East African community, to actually try to resolve this without them poking their noses in these processes. I hope that this time they will be modest enough to stay away and let these two communities try to find a solution. But I always find that their interference is always an obstacle to resolving this problem.
Even though sometimes they get invited by the regional leaders?
Well, I wouldn't know whether they get invited, but I see a lot of random statements being produced. As soon as there is going to be a summit in Rwanda, you get a random statement coming from the United States about what they are expecting, ordering certain actors to do certain things. You get statements from the EU. Why can't they just shut up for once and see if regional actors can...
You see change of tone in the president, under President Trump now, with the change in the administration?
I've detected a change in tone, but the Trump administration is still new. I think we shouldn't be too confident about what they are going to end up doing. There are some very negative forces in the EU, which we understand have been trying to rally all the other actors to take punitive action against Rwanda. So it's very difficult to know where we are going. But as I said, I hope that these powers could really stay away for a bit and see if regional governments in this region can actually push the DRC to do the right thing. And what is the right thing? The DRC should stop embedding FDLR within its army. The DRC should stop arming FDLR. Now we hear all these excuses about how Rwanda is just interested in minerals. Why don't they call Rwanda's bluff? Deal with FDLR, and then we can see, what other reason Rwanda will give for being interested in the DRC.
Take away the excuse. We'll see what Rwanda will do. Yeah. Jean-Baptiste, James talked about travel advisories, and before that statement released by M23, the US had advised its staff at the embassy to find a way of leaving Kinshasa. But now with that ceasefire, what do you see happening?
Well, what I see happening, especially in the eastern part where M23 is in charge, is that it's a good thing, because once they declare this ceasefire, and once this ceasefire is effective, then activities will resume, actually they have started. I think you read in the media yesterday that all the IDPs camps that were around Goma are no longer there. People have resolved to go back voluntarily home, because actually they have been kept hostages in those camps, because they were using them as a propaganda tool to show that the M23 has created a humanitarian crisis, which was actually something that the government of DRC did intentionally. So we hope that if...
They're still saying the same though. They're still putting out the same narratives that there is now the situation has worsened in Goma.
Yeah, actually they are saying that they have forced these IDPs to leave those camps, that the camps were destroyed by M23, and that the humanitarian crisis now has worsened. Exactly, this is what is this is the new narrative that they are putting forward.
Yeah, let's get the closing remarks, starting off with you, James, moving forward, and especially I would love you to speak to the media fraternity, both our local and international media covering conflicts in the region.
Yeah, I think we just need to be to do our job, to lay the facts as they are. And the facts are there.
Lazy.
The facts are there.
We're lazy.
Yeah, for people to go to Goma, to speak to the residents, the other day I was seeing demonstrations in Goma against Kinshasa. How come the same people who you were allegedly, supposedly protecting from M23 are now celebrating that you have lost Goma? So there's quite a lot. I believe there's quite a lot to put out, to write home about what's happening in DRC, in Eastern Congo, particularly in Goma. I want to talk about the issue of the development around the ceasefire. It's not the first time, not the second, not the third time that M23 has announced a ceasefire. Always it's going to be the coalition forces of Congo government to attack them and to violate the ceasefire. from the previous experiences, then that provokes M23 to respond and to now
they will not be
expand
attacked
the
and they
territory.
remain
Exactly.
seated.
So, but now that this is happening at a time, EAC leaders and SADC leaders are coming together. I saw from the tweet by President Ruto, who is the chair of EAC, he seemed to he confirmed that President Tshisekedi will be attending. I hope it will not be the same thing that, you know, he will not again be absent like he had initially confirmed, and then he was not there. Then he confirmed that President Kagame would be there, the President Ramaphosa as well.
Yeah, even Somalia.
It's going to be in Dar es Salaam. Then the President of Somalia as well, of course, Samia Suluhu as well, the host president. I think there are two twin interesting developments. One, the EAC has been pushing for peace talks.
Yep.
Lately, they were very categorical. Previously, there's a time they had two tracks, military and political. In the latest communique after the virtual meeting, they were very categorical, very clear dialogue, inclusive dialogue, including M23 with the Congo government. SADC said they said they would decide on the way forward in their recent meeting once they have had this engagement with the EAC leaders. So I think it's interesting to see what's coming out of this meeting this week, later this week.
Yeah, and the meeting is happening on Saturday. We've got to bring an end to this conversation, but it will be going on online. Please take part and share your thoughts. Our guests tonight were Dr. Goloba Mtewi, a political researcher, James Munyaneza, a veteran journalist, and Jean-Baptiste Gassominari, who's an expert in regional security. My name is Jackie Lumbasi. Thank you for joining us and have a good night.